Hello. Did it work? I had been asked from a friend of mine to talk about 10 years of being a mendicant and some of those highlights and insights. So I thought I'd share on video, which I've never done, surprisingly, in all these years, even though I've been on podcasts and things and whatnot. So here goes. And these aren't in any particular order. But these are just some of the things I've gleaned from a decade of doing this crazy thing. So one, when you are in the simplicity spectrum or a mendicant, which is, I guess I should define that for people who don't know, is somebody who follows generally three tenets or aims, which are simplicity, service, and spirituality. And those things all kind of go together to enable you to flourish as that. And if one of those elements is not, then you're going to have some trouble, which I've experienced over the years, especially during the pandemic when things like service get kind of, a wrench gets thrown in the works when you're trying to reach out and do things with people and everything's shut down. So it's been challenging. I've still kind of been warming up from it and trying to get back into the flow. But yes, so number one of the 10 insights is what happens when you live a simple life, when you really don't need money or much at all, is you're then freed up, right? And you can then plug into service. And I had this thought early on that I wanted to do a bunch of things that are awesome and amazing and helping people, but oftentimes the money is not in that realm. Take teaching, for example, which I actually looked into quite a bit when I was in college. If you're trying to live conventionally and you're being a teacher, it's going to be a little tough. And so, or at least you're underpaid for your value, really. So I just thought a radical shortcut would be just if I can learn to live with very little, then I can pretty much plug in wherever, because there's an endless demand for volunteers. So that's one reason you're freed up for service. Another reason that was or insight, I guess, or one of the impetuses for doing this in the first place was to escape the rat race, but also to safeguard my vitality and energy and health, because working 40 hours doing pretty much anything is a tall order, and it just takes up too much time from all your other pursuits and things you could be plugging into and being with people. So it was kind of a safeguard, kind of an act of self-love, really, to realize that you are really giving up a lot of your life. And even the book Your Money or Your Life was something I read early on that helped me, by Vicki Robbins. And yeah, so once you sort of get out of that rat race, out of the grind, then a bunch of the stressors of most modern ailments of most people that are caught up in that sort of evaporate, and the new ones replace them, as the irony goes. But at least you don't have to deal with, it doesn't add insult to injury, sort of. You just have less hoops to jump through, is what I found. And one thing that's interesting too is I used to talk with one of my other buddies that used to roll around Portland on bike and would stealth camp in parks and things. It's sort of like breaking orbit. Like, it's a challenge to break Earth's orbit. You have to have a giant rocket booster to get out. So likewise, if you're trying to drop out, it's a similar process, because there's all these forces that pull you and push you to stay in. And so to decouple from that is really powerful. Point number 3, career and friendship, which my buddy Joel uses, as well as I think both my buddy Goose and I now use that as a moniker. And basically, you're available. right? What a concept. Because for a lot of people, they're so busy, everything's scheduled. It has to be because you're so swamped and busy and overwhelmed with all the things that go on, especially in like an urban environment. So where do you have time for friends and community? And what I've found, I've almost had too much time where people are like, okay, like, I know you're available, especially during the pandemic, haven't been doing much. And so, but at least you're there, and however people want to show up and return that and reciprocate that, you are available. And what I also found was really interesting in Portland is that, like, I had almost like a double life where I could hold like different lives. Like I had one where I was in a relationship with somebody, and then I would do that, and then I would do all my volunteering and things, and then my other like community life. And I had so much time that it wasn't like I was necessarily sacrificing from one or the other. So it was interesting. Because most people, it's like their work life dominates, and then they try to squeeze in everything else. So I kind of I could eat my cake and have it too, or whatever the analogy is. So that was 3, career and friendship. Number 4 is being hardy and nimble. And this I got especially from this guy named Jacob Lund Fisker, who had this website called Early Retirement Extreme, where he basically saved 80% of his income, at least half, I think, and he retired early. So that's one route, right, to get out. And me being not, in a position to make money or be good at making money, like a stockbroker type thing, which is what he was doing. Not to mention the ethical implications of that. Like I never got into Bitcoin for that reason. That wasn't not an option. But he talked about where, to be kind of hardy and nimble in terms of, you can live anywhere. You can live in any closet, any tent, any structure, anything that's not desirable, because everything that's desirable is a premium generally. I lived in community houses, and I lived in a windowless basement room to start, which was a former pantry, and it was pretty cool actually. But the larger spaces go to people that have larger incomes because they have more luxury, they have more space, they have more room. So if you're willing to live in the least desirable spot, you have a lot of leverage. Was nice. So there's a nimbleness to that, as opposed to, I have to have X, Y, Z to live in certain places, and then you are, you're putting that on whoever's hosting you or wherever you're living. So that's being hardy and nimble, and being able to just move where you are, and also that goes into your own body too. So if you're healthy and able-bodied, you can be able to move around better. And even like when I gave up my car to start back in 2014 or 2013, I think I sold it. That forced me to be, walking and cycling and taking a bus, as opposed to you turn into these kind of Wall-E people where you become attached to your car like a cyborg, and then that sort of deteriorates your bodily health over time. Yeah, so that was hardy and nimble, number 4. Number 5 is rooted in spirituality, which is a big part of the mendicancy, really. That's like often overlooked. I think I've sort of lost track of that. I mean, I know I have over the years, because I think the concept of mendicancy wasn't always strong, especially when I used to practice with a group called Tetrana Sangha for a number of years in Portland. These are like Zen, hardcore vegan cyclists and not using much money at all. And when I left that group, and I was living in a community with various folks on professional spectrum and doing their thing and helping out. But I kind of slowly, I was still spiritual and doing things and having certain practices like yoga, and I was teaching kaleidoscope yoga. But, because Babylon and mainstream culture is so dominant, you will, unless you're really focused, you will kind of tend to backslide into it and get caught up. So I started even like playing video games again and buying them as a result, and like using a friend's laptop to get back into that old hobby that I had I had habit energy, big time habit energy over the years of that. But that's, it doesn't really, that's like not the most beautiful thing. And it also is counter to it even. It's counter to like the deeper, more beautiful way to show up. A lot of video games are. So that's just one example of straying from some of that core mendicancy. And, and that's one reason why I ended up exploring a monastic path for 3 months at Deer Park. Because there are a bunch of mendicants, time-honored tradition going back thousands of years of monasticism. And sometimes I thought am I really, felt like I was manufacturing it a little bit because it wasn't super in the flow, and that one reason why is because I had fallen away from that focused spirituality. And so it felt like, okay, going back, where was I most thriving, and then sort of going from there. And so that's even an option I might re-explore too, because I never really wrote it off my list. And what's hard too, when this is one of the biggest insights that I've had, is that being a kind of solo mendicant is challenging, even though I've had community and many friends and things to plug into. But like having people that are really on the same page as you and doing the same things is not the case generally, especially not in Portland. There's maybe half a dozen people like me that were living really close to how I was living out of a city of thousands. So like even, just like the collective energy of doing that and being surrounded by that, right? Of people not doing what you're doing, it is challenging. And so that's one reason why a place like Deer Park or some other place where you can, really root into that and you are all supporting each other on a similar mission is important. Which I'm kind of poking around Judeo-Christianity, which is kind of wild for me because I've been a skeptic and agnostic type person for 25 years, so that's interesting. But I was raised Christian Science until about 10 years, so I think those seeds have been planted and I'm just kind of rediscovering them. But I have been looking into the friars, St. Francis or Franciscan Friars a little bit, because they're also in that mendicant order as maybe an option. But yeah, so spirituality is really key for this whole process to work. And I thought too, because I had different shifting hats that I wore, like I was an activist and I was a yoga teacher and all these different things. They can fall under that umbrella of mendicancy, but that was never like my deepest calling, I think. And you kind of get caught up in all these people that aren't under that mendicancy title, right? Like where they're just dropouts or, trail bums or whatever descriptor that they go by. And they don't have that concept, like I said, of mendicancy and the three aims of mendicancy. Let's see what else on that spiritual angle, and then maybe briefly, hopefully not, because I could have a whole video on this, but celibacy and romance has been challenging on this for obvious reasons, because you're not going to find people to live in your little closet with you very easily, although there's a lot of folks who do van life and stuff, but even that requires a certain amount of overhead and income flow, which mine's always been so minimal. I mean, I've spent about $2,000 a year for 10 years. So that's about as low as you can go without going pure work trade. What's actually wild is if I would have done work trade for my housing, I would have probably spent $300 to $500 a year, maybe. Especially in the early years while I was really hardcore about it. But so yeah, good luck finding people that'll sync up with you on that. But the path has always been more important than partnership. That's a willing sacrifice that I've been willing to make. And I've had experiences too. That's a thing. You know, you're not going to be able to have like a nesting partner in the conventional sense. And I've told people over the years, especially in the last few years, where it's like I'm not going to be able to offer these things because of my lifestyle that I've been doing for forever. But yeah, so what happens, I think, as a result of that is celibacy, especially because it's steeped in religion and spirituality, and a lot of mendicants are celibate. Is that sort of starts to come around as like, well, maybe that's actually the wiser option, because as opposed to you're always yearning for the other, where's the bay? You know, you just are like, okay, I'm going to be available to everyone. I'm not going to be betrothed to one person. I'm not going to get lured also, because I've had trouble with that in the past, which I think we all have, where we get kind of lured in by lustful temptation and things, and you're like, oh, well, you know, this isn't actually so healthy. I'm going to get out of here. And just sort of being, and our whole culture is so like, you know, I think I find myself becoming more like traditional with like sexuality in some ways, which I know Deer Park is really big on that. It's one of their big focuses. And this kind of like hookup culture type thing where people are just running around doing these exchanges with really powerful energy is like maybe not so wise. But I've known that for a while, really. But so celibacy is something I'm still investigating, and I think once again too, if you're gonna do that, you need to have community around you. Otherwise, you're just gonna be lonely. You need to marry the sangha, as they say, and then you have your brothers and sisters to help you on that. So that was a long one about the spiritual roots of it all. Number 6, Hermit homebody, which is kind of a fun one. And this is what happens, I think, well, naturally I'm a bit of an introvert. I'm like a 60-40 introvert, extrovert. And so I'm fine with chilling at home and having my little books or media to keep me company as opposed to people. And also what I've found too, and I was very hardcore about not spending money. So for travel and things, right, you can hitchhike and do that. And I was also polite enough and respectful enough not to be like a mooch and be like, take me everywhere, people. I'm not going to split gas. So I would often I'm not even going to pay any money for that. So what happened is I spent a lot of time in Portland and I didn't really leave much. When I think, in hindsight, I probably could have explored a bit more. But, I was a stickler for really not spending money. And what that breeds is it breeds a certain kind of hermitness, and where you're home and you're holding space in one location, which also goes against kind of the mainstream Babylon travel is hyper normalized. But that's just one of the things. You become a bit of a hermit and a homebody. Even though I was plugging in locally quite a bit and getting out, still you do often spend a lot of times. And part of that too is you're not necessarily going to be rolling with conventional folks to do activities, so it'll further isolate you because you're not going to go out to bars and things and going to the food carts and spending an arm and a leg on, one food cart is like three bags of rice or whatever. It's like madness for some of these food prices in restaurants. And so that'll kind of further, and I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, because as like a mendicant type person, I think it's like normal to have a bit of a separation from like householders, as you would say in the monastic framing. And that's just how it goes. So you can be there for each other as fellow humans, but realize that you're on just different paths. That's fine. And which reminds me too, like in Corvallis, I've been poking around online on the Facebook groups, and there's like a young there's a young adults, which I'm technically not a part of because I turned 41 in a few months here. I think it's more like in their 20s, and then there's a not so young adult group, which which a lot of the things that they're posting in there, like I had done in Portland here and there, like game nights and things, and let's go to these restaurants and bars. And I get that from like a conventional living sense, and these are the things that are offered, right? These are the things that are like, this is what you do. You have money, you want to enjoy life. These are the physical establishments where you can hang out in. But for me, it's always been weird because I'm like, I don't want to spend money. So it's like, let's go to a park. Is there a potluck? Is there somebody's house? So these are sort of the loopholes that I can get connections need met. But I remember too, and I'll just close out this example about why you will become a bit more of a hermit if you do this. I played futsal one year in Portland, and that was pretty bizarre. Because I'm surrounded by a bunch of well-meaning people, but, they're all like professional types, and they have their careers, and they're paying their crazy apartment and housing rents and all this kind of thing. And I don't have like a deeper connections outside of this fun little thing we do. We run around and play indoor soccer, which I played keeper, which was fun. But it's like that. I knew even on a deep level, especially I remember I was waiting for the max to go home every day from doing that. And I'd be like, what am I? This is kind of weird. It's not really something a mendicant would do, It's not really in keeping with that. And, lo and behold, I never did it again. Much like fantasy basketball, never doing that again. Anyway, so that was point 6, hermit homebodiness. Point 7. So we are all kind of held hostage by the system, Babylon, and it's kind of like an open air prison, or like paddock, in a way, where here are all these rules that we don't consent to, and we have to make do with it the best we can. And you can't just like even lay down on the ground without somebody being, hey, that's illegal. I can't lay down on the ground and fall asleep. Or certain pieces of ground have certain hours where you can't lay down on them, like parks. Which, if you were to bring this up to like a lot of indigenous people, they think you were crazy. And in fact, we are pretty bizarrely crazy. But that's what's tough, because you have no real say with it, to a lot of the degree. You kind of have to play ball. And even like stealth camping has been something that I've been wanting to do more, but I feel so weird kind of skulking around and like hiding from the powers that be, that I don't even want to bother with it, because it like robs you of your dignity. But anyway, so we're all kind of held hostage by the system. And so being a mendicant, you can sort of ameliorate that to some degree. You don't have to be totally in lockstep with all the horrors of all the things imposed upon you. Okay, a couple more here. So number 8, decoupling from money. It's another big one, because you're tied in. You get a lot of your needs met and the thrill of buying or whatever it is from money. And case in point, like eating out. Like I don't know if it was the first. I'm pretty sure at least the first 4 or 5 years in Portland, I only ate out on my own money like 2 or 3 times, which is pretty bonkers. When some people will eat out 3 times a day. So just like, and I was treated graciously 15, 30, I don't know, something like that. At least once or twice a month from like housemates or friends or something to some meal. So I wasn't, which made it even more special. But that's something that you decouple from that. It's like, oh, I have money, I'm going to go eat some yummy food that I don't have to make. And of course shopping and things, but you decouple that need, that yearning, that want, and then you're liberated basically to focus on all these things, because there's so much to do that has no money involved. It will blow your mind, but a lot of people are so caught up in that money exchange that they can't get out of it. So that was decoupling for money. Another insight. And then the two more insights here. So number 9 is the humbling effect of being a mendicant, and the mercy that you have to rely on others. And we all are kind of integrated and interbeing with each other regardless. But when you are putting yourself at the mercy because you don't have like a great income or hardly any income at all, you make yourself vulnerable. And that can be stressful. And you have to give up some agency to some degree. Beggars can't be choosers, sort of. And you're putting it out there. Like when I got mass evicted, I see Theo's watching. When we got mass evicted from our community house, Casa Tecchio, I was kind of freaking out because I was only a year into it. And I thought, how am I going to keep doing this if I don't find super cheap housing? I was paying $150 a month to split a room. And so luckily, I mean, when you like as St. Francis said, when you embrace holy poverty, you will be embraced in kind, and that magic has worked out time and time again. So right when we were being evicted and I was supposed to move out end of August, September 1st, a spot opened in this community that I ended up living there for 5 years. So, and it was a much better situation, really. But I was a little freaked out because I was like, do I need to go camp in Forest Park? I'm not going to go back to getting a job and living conventionally in a rental. That's a slow death. I've always called that a slow death, the conventional living way. So, yeah. But you just have to put it out there. It's like, this is what I'm doing. This is my vision. These are my core values. Who will host me, basically? And so it's a symbiotic relationship. And I've had struggles with that because there's a lot of this conditioning where, you ought to be self-sufficient, independent, earn your own keep, this kind of thing. And even just begging, go outside a grocery store and beg for food, which I've never done directly. But I have been going to the food bank, which is kind of, in a way, it's a structured integration of begging and receiving and exchanging. But even I never did that in Portland because I had food stamps and I had dumpsters and I had food not bombs and other food sharing, so I didn't really need to. And food stamps is kind of like the easy way around it. You're begging from the government. Please, government, I am a poor, wretched soul. Give me my daily allotment, my monthly allotment. And that works out. But actually, I haven't been on food stamps for a year. I was just kind of, I was putting it off because my interfacing with the system is I just do not enjoy it. So I thought, let me see if I can actually get by. And I've been fine, really. Plenty of food. So this humbling process and being at the mercy of others is really important to this whole mendicancy thing. So that was number 9. So the last one, number 10, which is a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh about our life has to be our message. And this means that I like his emphasis on the word has to be, because we really have no other choice, actually. Like, whatever you're showing up as is it. So how do you want to do that? And we paint our life with our little brush of human experience. And another quote that I like too is, how will you live your life so it doesn't make a mockery of your values, is another example, right? Where it's like being a hypocrite really cuts deep, which I think is why so many people, one reason why I was, I think, turned off by a lot of Christianity early on is I just didn't think they were very Christian, right? Or a lot of conservative Christians today, like in the red sphere, they're not really living as Christ's example. So you just don't want nothing to do with it, right? You're like, I don't want to be wrapped up in hypocrisy, and so it pushes you away. But moreover, I think we need people that are actually living now, not 2,000 years ago, 500 years ago, whatever it is, living people like Thich Nhat Hanh and other monastics that are modeling this for people. And one of the greatest joys I had in Portland was that folks who come up to me that were entertaining this thought of dropping out and living more simply. And then I'd sort of be like, well, let me give you some pointers. And even when I was at Deer Park, I was talking with the youngsters, the 20-something-year-olds, of which one I was like, he was thinking about going to college. I was like, don't do it. He's like, well, actually, I can go for free. I was like, well, maybe do that then. If you can go for free, sure. But otherwise, become a monk or something, because just get out of Babylon. It's not worth it, how it's set up, And that's one reason why Buddhism and other mendicant traditions arose, because it is a direct pushback against the absolute insanity and madness that is this story of separation. Babylon was what Charles Eisenstein calls it. And it is a turning towards this story of interbeing, because we can't go back to how we lived indigenously. That's like a pipe dream. And I think even that's one of the struggles with intentional communities, because they want to live like that in a way, and they sort of have this hybrid that sort of functions okay. And for that, that's still like another way out of the worst of the system, especially if you have a family already and you want to maintain that. And the other route, or one of the other routes, is this sort of mendicant angle, because it's just madness. And Tai Phap Young, the former abbot at Deer Park, he when I was there, he kept talking to people. He was like, I don't know how y'all do it out there. It's crazy. And he's exactly right, 100% right. And so that's why it's baffling that there aren't like droves and droves and droves of people at their door saying, please let me in. The world is mad out here, But obviously we know why. It's because it's a little weird. It's weird to go against all this programming and wants and desires, and being celibate, for example, even giving up all your money. It's challenging. And so very few people that show up at their doors that are interested in monastic path actually go through with it. Myself included, the first go around. And in fact, there was 10 guys that I was there with, and only 2 ended up going through with it. So, I get it. Especially if you're younger, too. You're going to get sucked back, I think, back into the world more easily. But I've kind of been there, done that. I've been married. I worked. I spent my 30s living as a dropout, whatever I've been doing. And now as I enter my 40s, I'm looking for, I think, that community as like the cherry on top, finally, the mendicant retirement plan. Because, like I said, being mostly solo is not so good. But so that's been the 10 insights of mendicancy, and appreciate everyone listening.